Devout followers of Muhammad in the religion of Islam have struck in Canada. When will we simply see the truth?
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
You have probably heard the tragic news by now that one soldier was run down, killed by a recent convert to Islam, and another soldier was shot and killed in Ottawa. The one run down was in Quebec. The man who killed the officer with his car had been followed and had been watched by Canadian federal authorities for some time. He was a recent convert to Islam and was posting things on his Facebook page, indications of his love for and appreciation of and respect for Islamic Jihad. There are a lot of questions as to why this person was allowed the breadth that they were so that they could commit this horrific act. As of the time of this taping, the gunman in Canada's capital has not been identified as a Muslim either way, yes or no. He is also dead. They shot him. He was seen, however, wearing a scarf of some kind, something that made someone think, oh, he's wearing a Muslim head covering. People are in a state of shock. Now, for those of you who remember, we covered last week that ISIS released a statement calling upon Muslims everywhere to kill any soldiers that they could in countries that were fighting against Islamic State, the ISIL or ISIS terrorists, or whatever you want to call them, in Syria and Iraq. And the fatwa said no other judgment is needed. You don't have to go to any other imam or any other Muslim cleric and get a second opinion. The judgment is final. If you can kill them, please kill them. Now, the distressing part of this, or one of the distressing parts of this for me, is the concept of lone wolf terrorists versus those that are associated with a terrorist group. Now, please follow this line of thinking because it's really critical. One of the press reports that I read said that there's no confirmation yet that either of these two killers in Canada were officially associated with a terrorist group. What does that mean? Do they give them a card? Do they go and stand in front of a little camera and smile, and then they emblazon it on the side like a Costco card or a Sam's Club card or a driver's license? I'm now officially associated with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas. It doesn't have any meaning. What people are starting to see is that when they say the Shahada, all right, I'm going to quote it for you in English, the Shahada, the declaration of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his apostle. Or there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. That is their statement of faith, okay? When somebody declares that statement in the presence of a witness, they are a Muslim. They don't have a baptismal rite. They don't have an altar call. It's simply the declaration. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. So, once they embrace that, and they say, I am following the God of Muhammad, and I will follow the example of Muhammad, and I will live by the dictates of Muhammad, friend, that's what they need. They've got what they need. Because if you study the life of Muhammad, you see Muhammad killing people with his own hand. You see Muhammad authorizing or ordering the summary murder of people because they dared to criticize him. You see Muhammad launching jihads over and over again. Part of my master's research required that I do a lot of digging into Islamic terrorism. And one of the studies that I did was to look at the hadith, the record of Muhammad's words and deeds that are not in the Quran. And I believe I looked at Sahih Bukhari, it might have been Sahih Muslim, but whichever of the two it was, there was just over 100 uses of the word jihad by Muhammad, okay? For the vast majority of those uses, it meant fighting and killing, and if need be, dying in the way of Allah. That's what it meant. So when someone says there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet, and they embrace that with their whole heart, it's not going to take them long to see that Muhammad was the originator of jihad, that he is the fountain of jihad to this very day. And so whether or not these murderers in Canada are card-carrying members of ISIS or ISIL or Al-Qaeda or Hamas or Hezbollah, it doesn't matter. Once they make that profession of faith, they can immerse themselves in the words and deeds of Muhammad. They can immerse themselves in the words of the Quran. And they can come away with a very clear understanding that according to Muhammad and according to Islam, it is their duty to fight the infidels. As we watch the slow, steady waves of Islamic terrorism wash on the shores of one country after another, we are tempted to ask, how can this really be? How can Islam inherently be violent? There must be some other explanation. And when we have our political leaders one after another standing up saying that Islam is a religion of peace, the peaceful religion of Islam has been hijacked by a radical minority, you can start to figure it out. But one of the key means by which Muslims have been able to seduce and deceive and dupe the average Westerner, the average non-Muslim, and even some unwitting so-called moderate Muslims, is to simply deny the truth. In other words, they lie. You might have seen this man before, Reza Aslan. He was born in Iran. His parents fled here. One of the bios I read on him said that he flirted with being an evangelical Christian for a while. I'm not kidding. And then went back to Islam. He wrote a book, a blasphemous book against our Lord Jesus Christ, called Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth, where, of course, he denies that Jesus is the Son of God and that Jesus is God the Son. Well, he shows up quite a bit on various news outlets as an expert on Islam, and I'm here to tell you he is a deceiver. He lies through his teeth. Reza, if you're watching this, you know you're lying, and I'm going to make it a part of my mission in this show to keep tabs on you and show some of your lies once in a while. Let's roll tape and show one right now. This one was a whopper, that Muhammad stopped slavery.
They would say, though, that they appeal to better evidence than religious people do. For example, if you're a Christian, you could reassess certain claims, but at the core, there are certain beliefs that typically bind all Christians of a certain sort, like the whole Jesus thing.
Oh.
I mean,
no, that's actually not true.
I said typically. I'm saying typically.
God.
I'm saying typically, not every claim. I'm saying there's something that makes Christians Christians, right? There are certain things that make Muslims Muslims, right? And all I'm saying is that an atheist would argue that those things that make Christians Christians and Muslims Muslims should also be reassessed, and that those are the things that they hold on to when they should not.
Well, first of all, a person can believe whatever the hell they want to believe. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of what we talk about a modern free society. You can criticize those beliefs as irrational, but there's a difference between criticizing a person's belief and condemning that person themselves and treating that person, loathing them, or or dismissing them, or even suggesting that those people should be harmed because of their beliefs, because it is possible that that belief may lead to some kind of action. I think we should focus on the actions. Now, it's absolutely true that beliefs can and sometimes do lead to actions that violate human rights. And it is absolutely true that a lot of those actions that violate human rights are being done within Islam, and in particular in one region of the Muslim world. We should condemn those actions in the loudest terms possible. And as I said before, it's not enough to just simply say, well, those people, they may call themselves Muslim, they may say that they're doing these actions in the name of Islam, but that's not really Islam, they're not really Muslims. I understand that sentiment, and frankly, it's not exactly false in many ways. I mean, for instance, ISIS's notion of reestablishing slavery as part of Islam. I mean, if you know anything about Islamic history, the very first thing that Muhammad did was outlaw slavery. It was like the number one thing that he did when he established this new religious community. But nevertheless, there is no such thing as a Muslim Pope. There is no such thing as a Muslim Vatican. No one gets to tell you who is and who is not a Muslim. So, if a member of ISIS says, I'm chopping off infidels' heads because I'm a Muslim and Islam tells me to do so, you got to take his word for it. He's a Muslim, and that's his interpretation of Islam.
Now, please note that he says it with fire, with conviction. The first thing Muhammad did was end slavery. I don't know that, well, for sure the first thing Muhammad did was not end slavery, but that's a big assertion. I mean, that's like Jesus' first miracle was the wedding at Cana of Galilee where he changed the water into wine. I mean, we can identify the first thing Muhammad did, and it was end slavery? What a great man he must have been. It's a lie. Muhammad participated in slavery regularly. The Quran has multiple passages about slavery. I'm going to read to you a couple just to show that Mr. Aslan is lying, but to also help you understand. When the guy at CNN was interviewing him, he didn't know enough about Islam to know that Aslan was lying. I mean, most of us aren't students of the Quran or students of the Hadith, so we have this trusting element about us that we're going to listen to somebody who's supposedly an expert, and we're going to think, well, they're not going to lie to us, they're not going to get on national television and lie. Yes, they will. Look at this. This is from Ibn Ishaq, a history of Muhammad's life. The Muslim referee specifically obtained a promise from Muhammad that Muhammad himself would honor his decision concerning the Jews of Qurayza. Once Muhammad agreed, the referee pronounced his verdict. Then I give judgment that the men should be killed, the property divided, and the women and children taken as captives. Now, taken as captives, by the way, in this translation, the word is slaves, okay? Taken as slaves. I'll show you another one. This is from the Quran. This is not history. This is the Quran, chapter 70. The believers truly believe in the day of judgment and dread the punishment of their Lord. For none is secure from the punishment of their Lord and restrain their carnal desire, save with their wives and slave girls, for these are lawful to them. Now, for those of you who don't know the context of this, this is talking about Muslims should fear committing sexual sins. They're not allowed to have sex with just anyone they want. They are, however, allowed to have sex with their wives. They have to restrain their carnal desires, except for their wives and their slave girls. So here we have the Quran talking about the fact that devout Muslim men can, number one, have slaves. So evidently, Muhammad didn't get the memo that slavery was still okay, or Aslan was lying to us. I'm going with Aslan lying to us. Second of all, it wasn't just that they could have slaves, they could have sex slaves. They could have concubines. And again, I urge you, go to our website. You can watch the series, What Would Muhammad Do? For free. You can read the research papers that I did on Muhammad, on Islamic terrorists, on Sharia law, for free. They're all there. We've spent literally tens of thousands of dollars to make these things available to you for free. Go and read the material. And I'll tell you this one last story, and then you go to the website and you search it out for yourself. When they killed those Jews, the Jews of Qurayza, decapitated their men, That's why they're preoccupied with decapitation. They took their wives as slaves, and Muhammad took one as his own sex slave, his own concubine. And the sacred histories of Islam say that she remained in his possession as his sex slave until he predeceased her. And then she was let free. That is Islam. So when Reza Aslan says that Muhammad ended slavery, he's lying. I'll be right back. Does our commander-in-chief want a police state? There are a lot of people who think he does. There are a lot of people that think he would like to be something more of a dictator, and he has shown his willingness to take out his pen and use his executive orders, circumvent the elected process of using the House of Representatives and the Senate for their constitutional duties. But I digress. As I've watched this Ebola crisis unfold, I keep asking myself, what could possibly possess this president to not put a travel ban on West Africa? All right, we know the 3 nations where Ebola is coming from. We know that there are tens of thousands of people there right now that are infected. We know that the World Health Organization and the CDC are saying that by the beginning of the coming year, in January, February, there's going to be well over 1 million people with it in those 3 countries. Tens of thousands will be contracting it daily, okay? And they won't put a travel ban. And I said to myself, why? This doesn't make any sense. Well, we've got great screening processes. That's a joke. In the nations where they're coming from and when they land here. So for $19 an hour, they were running an ad saying you can swipe a thermometer over people that are coming from the west coast of Africa. You want that job for $19 an hour? But again, I digress. Why would they do that? Any 4th grader, 5th grader can do the math, okay? Somebody can be infected with Ebola for up to 21 days before they become symptomatic. All right? So the only way that their screening is going to work is if the person is symptomatic. All right? We have 150 people a day entering the United States from Liberia, from New Guinea, from Sierra Leone. They're coming here, okay? Right now, every day, from the west coast of Africa. 150 people a day. And so they get the little swab. Oh, you're not sick, you don't have Ebola. How would you know? If they're not symptomatic, how would you possibly know? Mathematically, it is a mathematic impossibility that the 150 people coming into this country every day would be found if they were infected. It's a mathematic impossibility because they've got a 21-day window where they could be infected and not be symptomatic. And conversely, it's a mathematical probability that there's people coming into the country right now from the west coast of Africa who are infected. And they're going to become symptomatic after they get here. Okay? So why would Obama do this? And you might say politics, you know, if he closes that border, then he opens himself up to the criticism of, well, why aren't you closing the Mexican border? Because this other virus is coming in through Mexico, which has claimed the lives of 4 or 5 American children so far. All right? That's not getting the press coverage that Ebola is, but it's a health crisis. There's children in over 40 states right now that have that virus. So I'm thinking, well, maybe Obama doesn't want to close the border in West Africa because he'll take too much heat for not closing the border properly, defending the border properly along Mexico, or the fact that he's about to do some sweeping dictatorial immigration change after the election. But then I thought something a little darker. What if he really wanted a police state? What if he really wanted to have some level of martial law? Take it out for a test drive in certain areas, like they did in Boston after the terrorist brothers did the bombing there, right? They had blocks of the area where it was a virtual police state descended upon them, and people's rights were trampled before their eyes. What if Obama wanted to take that out for a test drive on a little bit larger scale? Wouldn't Ebola present him with that opportunity? And then I read, the Pentagon is now getting involved. The Pentagon is using 30 of their medical professionals in uniform to be ready to be an immediately dispersed team to anywhere in the country, using the military in America to fight Ebola. That's just a half a step away of using the military to quarantine Ebola in America, which means boots on the ground, not to fight ISIS, but in the streets of American cities to go after you and I. Just a thought. I'll be right back. You don't have to be a prophet to see that America is in a world of hurt. We have become, in many ways, a debauched nation. We've been overrun by wickedness and by evildoers. But I want you to stop and think with me for a minute. Did it emerge from our local churches? No. Did it come from our elementary schools? Probably not. It came from two areas, one active, one inactive. The active area is people who went into our major universities and decided that they were going to teach the next generation of leaders either that God is dead or there is no God, or that moral absolutes are a thing of the past. Everything is relative. You have to choose for you what's good and true and right and just. And they began to push their anything goes sexual ethic and their child killing ethic with abortion and their homosexual agenda and their socialist agenda and down the line. And so they, in a very short amount of time, a generation and a half at the most, they were able to put out these graduates who then became the lawyers, the doctors, the business owners, who then said, hey, I'm going to run for office. And they ran for office in their local area, their state, their governor races, and then the U.S. House, U.S. Senate, the presidency. Some of them were placed on the Supreme Court, were placed in various federal courts or state Supreme Courts across the country. How else would you explain that in Massachusetts, for example, an elite group of judges overthrows the laws, overthrows the Constitution of the state, and says, you're going to have homosexual marriage here? Or in Vermont, or in Hawaii, or now in some 20 states around the union where one federal judge after another has struck down the will of the people, us, okay, where we say no through our elected officials or through some ballot initiative. We say marriage is between a man and a woman. You've got this elite group of people, primarily in the judiciary, but also in elected offices, who are destroying the country. And then you've got traitors like John Boehner, who says he's pro-life and pro-family, and he's a Republican. And then he goes and takes tens of thousands of dollars of Republican money, people who've given to the Republican National Committee or the election, that group to elect Republican House members. And he gives three, not one, not two, but three Republican candidates who promote baby killing and homosexual marriage. He gives them money. So it's not just the judiciary, it's corruption and betrayal and treachery in our elected officials. That's one reason that we're in such a mess. But the other is, from the confession of sin, things that I have failed to do. Things I have failed to do. Most of the Christians in this country aren't registered to vote. Of those that are registered to vote, half of them don't vote. And then of the Christians who do vote, 55, 60% of the Catholics vote for Obama. A third of the evangelicals vote for Obama. This is insanity. People, the election is coming, and I hope that the Democrats lose control of the Senate, but I'm not getting all excited about our Republican saviors because we've seen that they're not our saviors. We've seen that they can be treacherous. But the thing that I want to encourage you to do is not just to be involved in voting, but to please consider running for office next time around. in your local government, in your state government, maybe for federal office. Because this mess came to us from the top down, and friend, it's going to be fixed from the top down, or it's not going to be fixed at all.